Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring selections from the Bible,
Okay.
specifically Genesis, Exodus, and some highlights leading up to 2 Kings.
All right.
Probably already know some of these stories, but we're aiming for something a little bit more insightful than just a retelling.
Sure.
Get ready to unearth some hidden gems and connect the dots in ways you might not have considered before.
Yeah, it's not just about the narratives themselves, but
Right.
what they reveal about humanity, faith, and, the complexities of our relationship with the divine.
Right. So let's just start at the very beginning, Genesis, the creation account.
Okay.
It's almost like the DNA of the entire biblical narrative, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It lays out these foundational themes of God's power as creator, humanity's unique role as beings made in his image, and the introduction of good and evil. Everything else we'll explore kind of builds upon these ideas.
Okay. And speaking of building upon those ideas, we immediately see humanity's role tested in the Garden of Eden. But instead of focusing on the actual events, let's consider the aftermath, the consequences of Adam and Eve's disobedience.
Okay.
It seems like a pretty harsh punishment for eating some fruit, right?
Yeah.
What's the deeper significance here?
It goes beyond simply breaking a rule.
Right.
It's about a rupture in the relationship between humanity and the divine.
Okay.
Their disobedience introduces this whole concept of sin and separation from God, setting the stage for the struggles and challenges that follow throughout the rest of the biblical narrative.
So it's more about the impact on the relationship
Exactly.
than the specific action.
It's a crucial point to understand as we move through these texts.
Okay.
It's not just about a list of do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the deeper dynamics between humanity and God.
That's really helpful.
Okay, good.
Then we have the story of Noah's Ark, which on the surface seems like a story of God's judgment and destruction, but there's also this element of renewal, right?
Yes. It's a story of both judgment and mercy. God wipes out humanity due to rampant wickedness,
Right.
but then makes a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth by flood. It establishes a pattern that we see throughout the Bible.
Okay.
Humanity messing up, facing consequences,
Yeah.
and then receiving a glimmer of hope or redemption.
It's a cycle of rebellion and restoration, with God's faithfulness and desire for relationship shining through even in moments of judgment.
Right.
And after the flood, we have this seemingly small detail about Noah's sons.
Yes.
It's easy to skip over, but Ham's actions towards his father lead to a curse on his son, Canaan.
Yeah.
Why would such a seemingly minor event be included?
It highlights how interconnected these narratives are.
Right.
What might appear as a minor event ripples through generations,
Totally.
shaping relationships and power dynamics between different people groups.
Okay.
The Bible constantly encourages us to pay attention to the details, as they often hold deeper meaning and significance.
That's like a ripple effect, isn't it?
Exactly.
Even seemingly small actions can have far-reaching consequences.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered creation, judgment, and renewal.
Yes.
Now let's move on to a pivotal figure, Abraham.
Okay.
It feels like everything shifts gears when we get to his story.
Think of Abraham as a keystone in the arch of biblical history.
Right.
God makes a covenant with him, a promise that forms the basis of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Wow.
It's a promise of descendants as numerous as the stars, a land of their own, and a blessing that will extend to all nations.
It's amazing to think about the branches of that family tree
Yeah,
reaching across millennia.
exactly.
And speaking of descendants, there's that interesting detail of the name changes.
Yes.
Abram becomes Abraham and Sarai becomes Sarah.
Right.
What's the significance of that?
It signifies a new identity and purpose.
Okay.
It's not just a cosmetic change.
Right.
It reflects God's transformative work in their lives, setting them apart for this grand covenant. They're embarking on a new chapter,
Okay.
and their names reflect this shift.
But even with this incredible promise, Abraham has his moments of doubt.
Right.
I mean, who wouldn't question being told they'll have a son at 100 years old?
I know.
It makes you wonder about the human tendency to question even the most divine promises.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
His laughter, when told he would have a son, highlights the human struggle with faith and the difficulty of grasping God's plans, especially when they seem impossible.
Yeah.
It also reminds us that even the father of faith experienced moments of doubt and questioning.
It makes it more relatable, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
He's not this perfect, unwavering figure.
Right.
He's someone who grapples with the same doubts and uncertainties that we all face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It makes his faith journey all the more inspiring, as it shows that faith isn't about the absence of doubt.
Okay.
but about choosing to trust God even amidst our questions and uncertainties.
Okay, so we've talked about God's promises and human doubt.
Yeah.
But then we encounter this stark contrast with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham's nephew Lot lived. What does the destruction of these cities tell us about how the Bible portrays the relationship between sin and divine justice?
Yeah.
It's a pretty intense consequence.
It's a complex and challenging passage that has sparked debate for centuries.
Yeah.
Some interpretations emphasize the severity of the sins committed in these cities, highlighting the idea of divine retribution for rampant wickedness.
Okay.
Other interpretations focus on the themes of hospitality and the protection of the vulnerable, pointing to the mistreatment of the visitors who arrive in Sodom.
So there's no single easy answer.
Right.
Yeah.
It invites us to wrestle with difficult questions.
Yeah.
The nature of sin, justice, and God's response to human wickedness.
Mm-hmm.
It also compels us to consider the tension between collective responsibility and individual accountability.
Yeah.
Why were Lot and his daughters spared, for example?
Right.
These are questions that continue to resonate with readers and challenge us to grapple with the complexities of the text.
And speaking of challenging passages, the story of Lot and his daughters in the cave,
Yes.
after they escape the destruction, is particularly disturbing.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what to make of it.
It's certainly a difficult passage to read and interpret.
Yeah.
While the text doesn't explicitly draw a direct causal link between the destruction of the cities and the events in the cave, its placement after the destruction invites us to consider the ramifications of such traumatic events.
So it's less about assigning blame and more about exploring the complexities of human behavior in the aftermath of trauma.
Yes, and perhaps even more importantly,
Okay.
it prompts reflection on how we as readers engage with difficult passages like this.
Okay.
Do we try to explain them away, condemn them, or seek deeper understanding?
Right.
It challenges us to approach these texts with humility, recognizing that there are layers of meaning we may not fully grasp.
It's a reminder that engaging with these ancient texts often raises more questions than answers.
Right?
And that's okay.
That's okay.
It's about the journey of exploration and wrestling with these ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, so from the complexities of divine justice, let's shift gears to a new generation. Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph.
Okay.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
It certainly does. Isaac, the son of promise, faces challenges and ultimately chooses to bless his son Jacob, despite Jacob's trickery, to obtain his brother Esau's birthright.
That's a family drama with profound implications.
It is.
Sibling rivalry, deception, the weight of inheritance, these are themes that resonate through history.
And the birthright wasn't just about material possessions.
Right.
It represented leadership, spiritual blessing, and a connection to God's covenant promises. It carried the weight of their lineage and their future as God's chosen people.
It's like the birthright was a symbol of their destiny, both individually and as a nation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It highlights how personal choices and family dynamics can have far-reaching consequences,
All right.
shaping the course of history.
And then we have the epic tale of Joseph and his brothers. Betrayal, slavery, forgiveness. What makes this story so compelling, do you think?
Yeah.
Is it just a tale of forgiveness?
It's certainly about forgiveness, but it's also about how God uses adversity to achieve his purposes.
Okay.
Joseph maintains his faith even in the face of hardship, eventually rising to power in Egypt and saving his family from famine.
Wow.
His story offers a powerful message of resilience, hope, and the unexpected ways that God can work through difficult circumstances.
His ability to interpret dreams.
Yeah.
His rise to prominence.
Mm-hmm.
And that final reconciliation with his brothers. It's like witnessing a master plan unfolding.
It's a story that reminds us that even when things seem bleak, God is still at work, weaving together seemingly disparate events to accomplish his purposes.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to trust in his timing and sovereignty, even when we don't understand what he's doing.
It's a comfort to know that even in those moments when we feel like we've been betrayed or abandoned,
Yeah.
God is still there working behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
And interestingly, Joseph's family settling in Egypt sets the stage for the next major event, the Exodus.
Right.
We've journeyed from creation to covenant to the beginnings of a nation.
Right.
But now that nation faces a new challenge,
They do.
slavery and oppression.
Yeah.
The story of the Exodus is about to unfold, and with it, a defining moment in the identity and faith of the Israelites,
A huge turning point.
from a family drama to a national liberation movement. It's amazing how these stories build upon each other, creating this intricate tapestry of faith, history, and human experience.
It's a testament to the power and complexity of the biblical narrative. It's not just a collection of isolated stories.
Yeah.
It's a grand narrative that unfolds over generations, revealing the character of God and the journey of his people.
Well, I'm definitely ready to dive into the Exodus story.
Me too.
But first, we need to take a quick break.
Oh, okay.
We'll be back in a moment to explore the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom.
Sounds good. Welcome back. We're picking up where we left off. On the brink of the Exodus,
Right.
a story that has captivated imaginations for centuries.
Yeah, it's a story filled with drama, miracles, and ultimately the liberation of an entire people from slavery.
Right.
What are some of the aspects of the Exodus that stand out to you as particularly significant?
Well, the Exodus is more than just a historical event. It's a foundational narrative that shapes Jewish identity and understanding of God.
Right.
It demonstrates God's power to intervene on behalf of the oppressed
Okay.
and his commitment to liberation.
Mhm.
It's a reminder that God sees the suffering of his people and acts to deliver them.
We often hear about the dramatic plagues and the parting of the Red Sea.
Right.
These events are visually stunning, especially when depicted in movies and artwork.
Yeah.
But what were the logistical and human challenges of leading such a massive exodus?
It's mind-boggling to consider the sheer scale of this event.
Yeah.
Millions of people on the move, traversing harsh terrain and facing constant uncertainty. The text hints at the internal struggles and doubts that the Israelites might have experienced during this journey.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the fear, the complaints, the longing for the familiarity of Egypt, even in their enslaved state.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even amidst miracles and divine intervention, the human experience is messy and complex.
Absolutely.
There's faith, yes, but also fear, doubt, and the constant struggle to trust the unseen.
Precisely.
Okay.
The Exodus isn't just about outward spectacles. It's about an inner journey of transformation.
Okay.
A process of learning to trust God, even in the wilderness, even when the path ahead is unclear.
And during this journey, God establishes key religious practices and laws,
He does.
like the Passover and the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
These traditions and principles continue to shape Jewish and Christian faiths even today, don't they?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The Passover, commemorating the Israelites' liberation from Egypt, becomes a central ritual in Judaism,
Right.
emphasizing God's protection and deliverance. And the Ten Commandments, given at Mount Sinai, provide a foundational code of moral and religious conduct, addressing issues of worship, respect for parents, honesty, and justice.
These laws have had a profound impact on Western civilization, shaping legal systems and ethical frameworks for centuries.
Yeah.
They're not just ancient rules. They speak to universal principles of human behavior and social order.
Right.
Yeah.
They highlight the idea that true freedom isn't simply the absence of external constraints,
Right.
but also involves an inner ordering, a commitment to living in accordance with moral principles that promote justice and harmony.
But even with God's guidance and miraculous provisions, leading this newly freed people wasn't a walk in the park for Moses.
It wasn't.
He faced challenges, rebellions, and even questioned God at times.
His story reminds us that even the most faithful leaders are human.
Yeah.
They face doubts, experience frustration, and wrestle with the immense responsibility of guiding others.
Right.
Moses' leadership journey wasn't about flawless execution. It was about learning to rely on God's strength and wisdom, even in moments of weakness and uncertainty.
And despite leading them out of Egypt and through the wilderness,
Yeah.
Moses himself wouldn't be the one to enter the promised land.
Right.
Okay.
His story highlights the importance of succession and the passing of the torch to a new generation. It acknowledges that even the greatest leaders have a limited time and scope of influence.
Right.
It's a humbling reminder that the work of God continues even after we're gone.
It takes the focus off the individual leader
Exactly.
and places it on the larger mission, the ongoing journey of faith.
And that brings us to Joshua, who steps into the leadership role, guiding the Israelites into the promised land.
Okay. The story of the fall of Jericho,
Yeah.
with the walls collapsing,
Yeah.
is one of those biblical accounts that really captures the imagination.
It does.
Did the walls really come tumbling down?
Whether understood literally or metaphorically, the fall of Jericho symbolizes the power of faith and obedience. It highlights the idea that when God's people align themselves with his will, even seemingly impossible obstacles can be overcome.
But it also raises questions about the ethics of conquest and how we reconcile these accounts with modern sensibilities.
It's a reminder that interpreting ancient texts requires engaging with historical context
Right.
and evolving moral perspectives.
Right.
We can appreciate the story's meaning within its own historical setting while also acknowledging the complexities it presents from a modern viewpoint.
So it's about holding those two perspectives in tension,
Right.
acknowledging the historical reality while wrestling with the ethical implications.
Right. And then we move into the period of Judges,
Okay.
a tumultuous era marked by cyclical patterns of sin, oppression, deliverance, and flawed heroes.
It seems like every time the Israelites started to get comfortable, they would drift away from God, face some kind of consequence, cry out for help, experience deliverance through a judge, and then the whole cycle would start all over again.
It highlights the persistent human struggle with faithfulness. It's a reminder that even after experiencing God's deliverance and provision, it's easy to fall back into old patterns, to forget the lessons learned, and to chase after other gods.
But it also shows God's patience and mercy,
It does.
his willingness to repeatedly deliver his people despite their repeated stumbles.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that God doesn't give up on us easily.
And during this time, we encounter Deborah, a remarkable woman who emerges as a leader and judge, rallying the Israelites to victory.
She challenges assumptions about gender roles and leadership, demonstrating that God's Spirit can empower anyone, regardless of social expectations.
It does.
It's a powerful reminder that God often chooses the unlikely to accomplish his purposes.
Her story encourages us to look beyond traditional categories and to recognize the potential for leadership and anointing in unexpected places.
And eventually, this period of cyclical ups and downs leads to a desire for a more stable form of leadership,
It does.
which brings us to the establishment of the monarchy
Yes.
and the selection of Saul as the first king of Israel.
It's a significant turning point.
Okay.
The people, longing for a sense of unity and security, reject the more decentralized leadership of the judges and demand a king.
Oh,
They're seeking a visible human authority figure,
right.
someone who embodies their hopes for strength and stability.
It's interesting how this desire for a king also reflects a certain distrust in God's direct leadership.
It does.
They want a tangible human presence to reassure them, even though God has been their king all along.
It's a tension that we see throughout the Bible.
Right.
The human desire for control and the surrender required for true obedience to God.
So we've gone from the uncertainty of the wilderness to the establishment of a kingdom.
We have.
It feels like a new chapter is beginning, one filled with both promise and potential pitfalls.
It certainly does. With the rise of the monarchy, we enter a new era in Israel's history,
Okay.
one marked by both grandeur and turmoil.
Okay.
And at the center of this era are figures like Saul, David, and Solomon,
Right.
each playing a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of the nation.
And that takes us right into the stories of the kings, where we'll see how this new form of leadership unfolds, both its triumphs and its tragedies.
We will.
We'll have to dive into those stories after a quick break.
Okay.
We'll be back soon to explore the reigns of these iconic kings. Welcome back. We've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive from creation to covenant, from Exodus to the establishment of a kingdom.
We have.
Now we're stepping into the era of kings,
Yes.
a period filled with larger-than-life figures who shaped the destiny of Israel. Where do you think we should start?
Well, we left off with the selection of Saul as Israel's first king. He embodies both the promise and the peril of this new era.
Yeah, he had all the outward qualities of a great leader.
Mm-hmm.
Charisma, military prowess, a commanding presence. But somewhere along the way, things took a dark turn. What happened?
Saul's story is a classic tragedy. His initial victories and popularity seem to fuel his pride and insecurity. He becomes increasingly disobedient to God's commands, consulting mediums, making rash vows, and ultimately failing to fully carry out the destruction of the Amalekites as God had instructed.
So it's not just about power itself,
Right.
but how that power is wielded. It seems like Saul let his insecurities and desires for control get in the way of his obedience to God.
Precisely. It highlights a key theme that runs throughout the Bible: the tension between human desire for control and the surrender required for true obedience to God. Saul's downfall serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and the importance of remaining humble before God.
It makes you wonder if there are safeguards we can learn from Saul's mistakes. How do you think his experience might inform our understanding of leadership today?
It's a question worth pondering. It reminds us that even those in positions of authority are susceptible to temptation and the allure of power. It highlights the need for accountability, self-awareness, and a constant reliance on God's guidance. True leadership isn't about wielding power for personal gain, it's about serving others and aligning our actions with a higher purpose.
It's a reminder that leadership in any context requires a deep sense of humility and a willingness to submit to something greater than oneself. And into this drama steps David, a figure who has captured imaginations for millennia. We have the young shepherd who slays the giant Goliath, becoming a national hero overnight. What is it about David's story that resonates so deeply with people?
David's anointing as king while Saul is still alive creates a complex dynamic. It's a period of rivalry, intrigue, and ultimately tragedy as Saul, consumed by jealousy, pursues David relentlessly. But despite the challenges, David remains a compelling figure. He's known for his courage, his military skill, his deep devotion to God expressed through poetry and music.
And there's that beautiful story of his friendship with Jonathan,
Yes.
Saul's son. Their loyalty to each other amidst such turmoil speaks volumes about the power of genuine connection.
Their bond is a powerful testament to the enduring nature of love and friendship, even in the face of adversity and conflicting loyalties. It's a reminder that human connection can transcend political divisions and personal ambition.
But even David, the man after God's own heart, isn't without his flaws. We can't overlook his affair with Bathsheba and the subsequent cover-up which involves the death of her husband Uriah. How do we reconcile this dark chapter with his image as a hero and a man of faith?
David's story is both inspiring and deeply human. He experiences great victories, demonstrates remarkable faith, and writes some of the most beautiful psalms in the Bible. Yet he's also capable of grave mistakes. His actions highlight the complexity of human nature and the reality that even those who are close to God are susceptible to temptation and sin.
So it's not about presenting a sanitized version of his life,
Right.
but about acknowledging both the good and the bad, the triumphs and the failures.
Exactly. The Bible doesn't shy away from portraying the messiness of human experience, even when it comes to its heroes. David's story reminds us that we're all flawed individuals striving to live meaningful lives in the face of challenges and temptations. And importantly, his story doesn't end with his sin. He faces the consequences of his actions, repents, and experiences God's forgiveness.
It's a reminder that failure doesn't disqualify us from God's grace.
Right.
There's always a path to redemption and restoration. And then there's Solomon, David's son, known for his legendary wisdom. His reign seems like a golden age in Israel's history.
Solomon inherited a unified and prosperous kingdom, and in the early years he's portrayed as a wise and just ruler. He builds the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, a symbol of God's presence and Israel's national identity. He establishes trade relations, expands the kingdom's influence, and it becomes renowned for his wisdom and ability to resolve disputes.
But even with all that wisdom, his reign wasn't without its troubles, was it? It makes you wonder if wisdom alone is enough for effective leadership.
That's a good question. Over time, Solomon's vast wealth, numerous wives and concubines, and tolerance of their foreign gods lead him astray. His heart turns away from the one true God, and his actions have negative consequences for the kingdom.
It seems like Solomon's wisdom, while impressive, wasn't always accompanied by the moral fortitude to resist temptation and remain faithful to God. It's a cautionary tale, isn't it?
It certainly is. It reminds us that intellectual brilliance and worldly success don't guarantee spiritual faithfulness. It highlights the importance of guarding our hearts, staying grounded in our values, and recognizing that true wisdom is ultimately about aligning our lives with God's will.
And despite his early successes, Solomon's later actions set the stage for the division of the kingdom after his death. It's a tragic end to a reign that held so much promise.
It's a reminder that the choices of leaders have far-reaching consequences, both for themselves and for those they lead. And so we enter a period of upheaval and division, with the kingdom splitting into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. It's a tumultuous era, marked by political instability, social unrest, and the rise of prophetic voices challenging the status quo.
And this is where the prophets take center stage, individuals like Elijah, Elisha, and others who dared to speak truth to power, calling out injustice and calling the people back to God. They were pretty fearless, weren't they?
The prophets played a vital role in this period, acting as God's messengers, confronting corrupt leaders, warning of consequences, and urging both kings and the people to repent and return to faithfulness. Their courage in the face of opposition and persecution is truly inspiring.
They didn't hold back even when their message was unpopular or dangerous. Imagine standing up to a king and pronouncing God's judgment. It takes a certain kind of boldness to deliver that kind of message.
Their willingness to speak truth, regardless of the personal cost, is a powerful example for us today. They remind us that following God involves more than just private piety. It requires engaging with the social and political realities of our time and speaking out against injustice and oppression.
So it's about connecting faith to action, about letting our beliefs shape how we live in the world.
Precisely. The prophets challenge us to examine our own lives and ask ourselves where we might be called to speak truth to power, to challenge the status quo, and to advocate for those who are marginalized and oppressed.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from creation to kings, from covenants to prophets. It's been an amazing journey through these foundational narratives. What are some of the key takeaways that you hope listeners will walk away with?
These stories may be thousands of years old, but they grapple with timeless human questions about faith, leadership justice, and the complexities of our relationship with God. They offer insights into human nature, the consequences of our choices, and the enduring power of God's love and mercy.
I think what struck me most was the honesty of these stories. They don't present a sanitized version of faith or leadership. They show the struggles, the doubts, the failures, and the messy reality of human experience.
It's that honesty that makes these stories so relatable and enduring. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that God can work through our weaknesses, and that there's always hope for redemption and restoration.
Well, it's been a truly fascinating journey through these ancient texts.
It has.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these stories for yourselves. You might be surprised at what you discover.